feel Afghanistan is all about what's going to happen today, what's going to happen tomorrow, or what happened yesterday. But I'm going to run you through history for the first 5 to 7 minutes and then talk to you about why we think we are where we are, because it links to where the world needs to go in the future. So, and again, of course, it's a Pakistani perspective, so take it as it is, but let me just go through this and we'll have a conversation. So, everybody knows, the point I want to leave with you is, there have been two major wars in Afghanistan, 79 onwards and 2001 onwards. Neither of them, Pakistan had anything to do with starting. In fact, both of them, Pakistan is the country that has suffered, and frankly, I wish neither of them would have happened. But in any case, starting with the Soviet invasion, Pakistan was the frontline ally for the West. 1980 onwards, we start this journey of Afghan refugees. At the height, 5 million, approximately 5 million Afghan refugees in Pakistan that we were hosting mostly from our own resources. Just keep marking what I'm telling you, and I'm happy to talk to you and think about who else would have done this. This is only included to say that they were really freedom fighters and moral equivalents of the founding fathers. These are the very same people we started calling terrorists on 9/11. There's a dichotomy here, which I'll come to, but please do register this. The war goes on through the 80s. The Western intelligence agencies and ours worked hand in glove together throughout that period with a lot of operational synergy and everything, you name it, and were praised to the sky throughout that process for fighting the Soviet Union through the Mujahideen, essentially the forefathers, or in fact really the fathers, literally, of the Taliban movement. Here is the most interesting part, and I'm telling you all this or saying all this because this will tie up to today. A year after the withdrawal of the Soviet Union, the most allied of allies becomes the most sanctioned of countries in the world. A year later, the Presley Amendment comes in by the US, and we are told, you are now out of our orbit. Not only that, we are not even going to allow any arms sales or any concessions, even when we were buying from our own money. For those of you who don't know, Pakistan bought F-16s from the US, Pakistan getting F-16s and assistance. Through the 90s, there are F-16s that Pakistan had paid for, parked in a desert in New Mexico. The Americans refused to give us the F-16s, charged us parking fee, and ultimately gave us soybean oil for those F-16s. And the soybean oil did not fly, even if we tried. This was the 1990s. Going from moral equivalent of the founding fathers to Pakistan being the ally to suddenly Pakistan is the isolated ex-ally and now sanctioned country, and nobody was. 3 years the government held, the government that the Soviets had left, held. In 1993 the president was ousted, in fact killed, and the civil war started in earnest. There was already violence, but civil war started in earnest. Afghanistan basically went to hell in a handbasket. It was a total collapse of any semblance of stability in the country. The Taliban were formed in Kandahar, which is the southern city of Afghanistan, in a small mosque. These were religious devotees, many of them born in Pakistan as Afghan refugees. The refugees that we did not bring into Pakistan, but were forced upon us. And we, of course, they are brothers and sisters, and we did take care of them, but we did have to deal with that, and these people were born there. A lot of conversation about Pakistan creating. Let me just say this much about the Taliban. At the time, the only thing that the Afghans cared about was stopping open rape on the streets of Afghanistan and making sure that people could wake up and sleep without being murdered. This was the only conversation in that Afghanistan. That's the level of the civil war. So today it's very easy to turn around and say, oh, Pakistan supported the Taliban. Pakistan only supported some semblance of stability in Afghanistan at the time, where there was no option, refugees coming over, and between 1980 and 1996, those 5 million refugees, not their fault, but the border brought in gun trotting, narco trafficking and crime in Pakistan. We had never seen those things before in the way that they came into Pakistan. This was the reality of the 90s that the world very easily forgets. In any case, the Taliban take over most of the country. The rest is history, and we get to 9/11. What happened? Why have I gone through all of this for you? On 9/11 dawned a reality which was then formally acknowledged by the US President George Bush and many other Western leaders. Number one, a mistake was made by abandoning Afghanistan and Pakistan. Why? Because it left a security vacuum that was filled by what was later called Al-Qaeda and many other names, the terrorists or the freedom fighters of yesteryear. How could that happen? Because Afghanistan was in total chaos. It was free for all, everybody and anybody was there, tons of money was flowing into Afghanistan and being used for whatever purposes, but there was a major security vacuum. Second, and please note this point, for the average Afghan, they had been betrayed. They had been used, abused and thrown away. And the sentiment in Pakistan was not much different. Here is a country that suffered so much, fought, 1 million Afghans lost their lives, all these refugees, millions in Pakistan, and Charlie Wilson's war, if anybody has seen the movie or read, it was I think $50 million or $5 million maybe that he'd gone back to ask for from the US President, who said, I've had enough of Afghanistan, thank you very much. The result is exactly what we saw. This betrayal, for those of you who come from the Western countries, this part of the world does not forget betrayal. Keep this in mind. It does not forget how it was treated. And then what was talked about, I lived in the US for about 15 years. Every time in the policy circles, the conversation was, we made a huge mistake by breaking ties with the Pakistani military. We could not understand what was going on on the ground. We had lost touch with the local dynamics of Afghanistan. This is the US speaking and the Western world speaking. And so all of this essentially, as far as the West was concerned, was a non-issue. Abandonment, betrayal, no contact with the ground, intelligence or otherwise. And so the West had become, for the people in Afghanistan, from the leading patron who financed and fought the war to an untrusted, selfish foreign power. I'm telling you of the mind of the people in Afghanistan. I'm not claiming that this is correct or incorrect. This whole presentation is really relaying to you the sentiments of the ground. So please don't quote me saying that I'm saying this. This is the sentiment that I'm reporting to you. All of this I mention because this is relevant to what is happening today, as in today, and I will come to that. 2001, Pakistan overnight becomes the most allied of allies. Gets major non-NATO ally status in a year or two after this. And look at the statement of the US President. America will not just simply leave after the military objective has been achieved. And there's another statement that I don't quote here, we will never abandon Pakistan again. So the realization was there of the mistake that was made. And so Pakistan and the US become the best of partners, and Pakistan actively supports the military campaign next door. A campaign, by the way, that we were not consulted on. The attacks happened, we found out from television, and before we knew it, there were people crossing over into Pakistan to take shelter. This is a very important point. Those people were not here. They were in Afghanistan. They came here through the porous border after the attacks to run away from the American military campaign. If we had been told at that time, we could have managed the border perhaps somewhat better. But we were not consulted. Here is a turning point that nobody wants to talk about. In December 2001, there was an attack on the Indian Parliament, a terrorist attack that they immediately blamed on Pakistan, and today there are reports that not Pakistan is writing, others are writing saying actually that was done from within India. In any case, there was an attack, and for 10 months, the Indian army in full strength mobilized and was on the border, forcing Pakistan to focus on the eastern border. Think about it one more time. If India is the ally in this entire game and the good friend, They artificially created a crisis that forced the entire Pakistani military to focus on the eastern border while also having to manage the west. That was the American interest. So where India's loyalties lay at the time and what was going on, you can decide. But we were actively managing both the eastern and the western border at the time. It was a classic two-front situation. I'll come to what we've done now, but please note this point that for 10 months, in the most crucial moment, India forced a crisis in the east which Pakistan had to focus on. Then of course come the drone strikes in Pakistan, hundreds of them. Pakistan partnered with the US, we know all of that, sent in thousands and thousands of troops into the border region, which we had never done since 1947. Never ever had we sent the army in these regions, but we were forced to do it, we did it, we fought. The US officials and British and others are on record saying that no country did more against Al-Qaeda in partnership with the West than Pakistan did. It's on record, you can check this. And what happens? When we fight these people, when we go into these areas which were really Pakistan's Wild West in some ways, there is a backlash. And this is very important. Why did the backlash come from the locals? The backlash came because for the locals, one occupier in the 80s had been replaced by another occupier who, remember by now, was the untrusted foreigner in Afghanistan. I'm not saying this, so please don't quote me on this. I'm just telling you, this was the sentiment in the entire tribal belt and in Afghanistan. So what was our fault? What was our sin as the Pakistani military and Pakistan? That we had teamed up with the foreign occupier. So much for gaining and winning hearts and minds. This was the mindset that we faced after we went into these areas and tried to tackle the enemy that had come from across the border who wasn't here before. Second, these 5 million refugees, where do you think they were housed? There were refugee camps. The Taliban were born and grew up there. Many others during the Mujahideen era had come and gone regularly. So they had personal links, they had cultural links, they were married here, many of them had families. And now suddenly Pakistani state had gone in to take them on. When we kept explaining this to the Western world, they weren't interested. All they were interested in was, are you taking down these people or not? And the reaction came from 2004 onwards, but 2007 to 15, Pakistan faced terrorism every single day. 80,000 plus casualties, and till today, $152 billion lost in the economy. I just leave you with a question on this. Think of any other country that has taken these kind of losses for a war that we had nothing to do with and started next door. If you can think of another country, I'd be happy to know. This war went on and on. Over 1,000 major and minor military operations by the Pakistani military. I again ask you, if you know of anybody who's had 1,000 military operations in their own territory, let me know, I'll be interested. Every single corner of Pakistan that was contested or where the Taliban were infested was cleared by 2015. These are the terrorist incidents. At the peak, 2,000 plus in a year. This is what Pakistan was going through and Pakistanis were going through, I repeat, for a war that we had nothing to do with when it started. This is the kind of effort the Pakistani military has made. If you go and talk to the Pakistani military, you'll see them at Torkham. Ask them, how much time do they have, or their colleagues have had in the past 10 years, of coming out of battle zones before they go back in. No other military in the world has had the kind of rotation that the Pakistani military has had to have. They have literally been fighting for the past 10 years. And these are also people, by the way, who have families, wives, kids and parents. Not a mention in the international press when it comes to a conversation about Pakistan. Okay, so this is one part of the story. The second part of the story is, what was the goal? And I'll talk about that, but in 2013, a conversation began that there should be a dialogue with the Taliban. And so an office was opened in Doha, the famous Doha office that we all know now, For I think 2 years it was closed before it again opened or whatever. But the point is, there was a thought that we should talk to the Taliban. We, of course, being the international presence in Afghanistan. But our conclusion of the first 2 years of this quote-unquote conversation was, the only effort that was made was to try and break the Taliban from within. How? Talk to the Taliban, and the others who are hardliners will start opposing those who are negotiating. It was a non-starter because there was a fundamental misunderstanding about what the Taliban were doing. They were essentially fighting an occupier. Keep in mind what I told you earlier, in their mind. I'm not at all saying this. There was a UN resolution under which the international forces came. We completely understand that. I'm just explaining to you what went wrong in terms of understanding what the fighter was thinking about. And then in 2015, Pakistan was asked and asked and asked to try and facilitate a dialogue. And in Burban, which is a hill station an hour or two north from here, we brought together a meeting where the Taliban, some of the Taliban were there, and some of the American representatives and others, I think from the Afghan government, not government, but some of their reps were there. This is a very important data point, because Pakistan had bent over backwards to do whatever it could to use its leverage to bring, and I'll talk about leverage later, bring these people to the table. And please go and look at the press the day after. The conversation was, Pakistan has brought these people to Burban. This proves Pakistan controls the Taliban. This proves Pakistan has been lying. So for all the effort that we made, we were given a very clear lesson that we better stay out of this. Otherwise, all that will happen is that we'll be blamed for the effort that the international community asked us to make. In any case, a dialogue or whatever you want to call it proceeded, whichever way it did. This is to be the Prime Minister of Pakistan, who was labelled as Taliban Khan for years and years, and his basic fault was that he kept telling the world, you won't find a military. Stop them. The Afghans come back and say, you dare not stop these people, this is customary, and they will continue. To this day, the Taliban, by the way, are saying the same thing. Then, fencing. We said, okay, nobody's going to do anything, let's fence the border. The US, Afghanistan, sorry, we're not interested. In fact, the Afghan government opposed it. Think about it. If their number one problem was the border, we are saying fence the border. They say, no, don't fence the border. Okay? 97% of the border is fenced today. Then we said, let's do formal border crossings. No informal border crossings. The answer was no. Afghans are allowed to cross whenever they want. And last, we have now in the last 2 years said, formal visa regime. And there's been resistance on that from the Afghan side. So if I am guilty, would I be bending over backwards to say, let's block this so that the problem goes, let's have visibility so that the problem goes? The answer is no. We don't want to do this. Why have we done this? Because, ladies and gentlemen, Pakistan's problem is that for 20 years there's been terrorism flowing from the other side. You don't want to believe me? Don't believe me? Read our dossier, please. India has been perpetrating terrorism. The Baloch militant organizations are active there. The Americans have told the world that they've killed X number of TTP, Pakistani Taliban, in Afghanistan. That's why we are manning this. But if it was the problem of Afghanistan, they should have been more eager than us. It was the polar opposite. So think about whose sincerity you want to question. So when we are now being told take more refugees, please think about how we will know whether it's ISIS coming, TTP coming, or a real refugee coming. Osama bin Laden, absolutely an intelligence failure. There's no question about it. Not only by Pakistan, by the entire world. Clearly, the entire world's intelligence was in this region, in Afghanistan, etc. How he ran away from Afghanistan, somebody should answer. I don't know. Here is the only thing I'll put to you. Anytime there is something that happens in Pakistan, our intention is questioned. Double game, you must be doing this. Anytime it happens anywhere else, it's capacity. When we kept saying for years, we are fighting the Pakistani Taliban, India is on our head all the time, we cannot tackle all the problems everywhere ourselves, so let's take the refugees back, let's do the fencing. The answer was no. Right? This on the right is the picture of the hotel where the 9/11 hijackers stayed. 5 minutes from the Pentagon and about 7 from the White House, where they trained, prepared, and then went for 9/11. I've never heard any responsible person saying this was all planned. But Osama bin Laden is found, and immediately, how could you not know? 7/7 London. Anybody says the British state was involved? And there was very, very much order in London and New York when this happened. There was chaos in Pakistan. This guy, Osama bin Laden, from his compound, it is today publicly known, documents were found, USBs were found, in which there were letters he was writing to his accomplices saying, Pakistan has joined the infidel, cause maximum casualties on Pakistanis. I want to ask you, we have to be mad as a nation if this guy who was ordering his people to kill my family would be harbored by me. I mean, we really have to be mad. So this insults Pakistani minds when this happens. This is just now a book has come out by Peter Bergen, the famous guy who interviewed Osama bin Laden, I think whenever, 2001, or I'm not sure whenever, who's done a lot of work on Al-Qaeda. I'll let you read it. After all these years, every official there was involved says Pakistan did not know. But this conversation keeps coming back again and again. And finally, on the celebrations. Yes, there were celebrations. We saw pictures as well. We investigated. In Afghan refugee camps. They have support. They were born there, some may have friends there, they've grown up there. The question to ask is, after 2 decades of development on the other side, why are these people still not converting? I don't know. Pakistan gets a bad name, but that's the reality. And by the way, overwhelming majority of Afghan refugees are law-abiding citizens, colleagues, citizens of Afghanistan who are colleagues in Pakistan who've grown up here, including, by the way, many in the Ashraf Ghani government, whole Afghanistan cricket team. Right? And many others. So the point is, yes, it happened. It happened in the refugee camps. The answer remains dignified return, or please don't blame us. We have been the most gracious hosts the world has seen. For all of you who've come from other countries, look at the conversation in the West about refugees. I was shocked to read, paraphrasing, but G7 or UNSC, one of the two. I was shocked to read that they came out saying that the migration problem should be contained within the region. So the region seems to be the free for all and everybody else should be protected. That's how gracious we've been. Finally, where are we today? I've taken you through a lot of history for a reason, asked me questions about the present, but from Pakistan's perspective, the world has a simple choice. Go back to the 90s, make the same mistake again and get the same result. Don't expect a different result from the same policy. Or let's learn from our collective mistakes and go for a better future. If you were to learn from past mistakes, this is a very interesting, I almost feel sorry, but this is Senator Joe Biden in 2002 saying, letting Afghanistan degenerate into a state of lawlessness that made way with the Taliban. After the Soviet withdrawal, America turned its back as the country disintegrated. And Secretary Clinton, we will not abandon you, we will stand with you always. Is the world going to do it or not? Because the average Afghan is asking a very simple question. Are the only Afghans you care about the ones who were fortunate enough to be associated with your organizations? Or do you care about the 35-40 million who are going to be left behind with nothing else in their power? So, to bring it all together, what are we saying to the world? We are saying to the world, engage with Afghanistan for the sake of the average Afghan in your selfish national interest. Not as a favor to Afghanistan, not as a favor to anybody, but in your selfish national interest. Why? And what are we hoping for? Number one, inclusive government. Number two, respect for human rights, keeping in mind the Afghanistan context, which is only realistic. Third, an economic and governance support to avoid a collapse. So there should be some international economic plan at some point. Fourth, recognition question. We are not going on our own. We are saying coordinate with the entire world. Let's come up with a way to engage and figure out what the right terms of recognition are. Fifth, please don't miss the opportunity that the Taliban have basically made the right statements and the right noises so far. They could have come into power and said, thank you very much, we are going back to the old. They're actually trying very hard to signal to everybody that they want legitimacy. So that may be a window of opportunity to engage with them. The result I don't know, but there is a window of opportunity. The next bullet is important. Everybody in the international community is saying, prepare for the new wave of refugees. And I always ask this question. Don't we and the world, doesn't the world owe Afghans to ensure that a humanitarian crisis and a refugee influx is prevented? Why is it taken for granted that, oh, it's going to be there, so Afghans are commodities, let's get ready for another 5 million to leave? Why are we not working to prevent this crisis by engaging with Afghanistan to make sure that the situation doesn't fall apart? I've been getting very excited phone calls from friends in the journalism community asking me, so how many people have come over? How many are coming? We hear there's a lot of pressure. There is no pressure, thankfully, because bloodshed was averted. There wasn't a protracted conflict. There isn't that pressure. Let's ensure that pressure doesn't come. Rather than being excited about how many have shown up and how many more will come. These are human beings who don't want to be displaced. Afghanistan is one of the most self-respecting, brave nation in the world. They don't want to leave their country. Let's make sure that it doesn't come to that. And finally, our evacuation effort, I think the entire world now has recognized, perhaps not as much, but should. And here is the outcome. If we abandon Afghanistan again, there will be a security vacuum and there will be international terrorists who find space there. That's again just logic. Second, if the governance collapses, the economy will collapse, there may be a renewed conflict, there may be an illicit economy, and there will definitely be a humanitarian crisis. On the other side, if we engage, what is the benefit we can get? We can influence an inclusive government. We can ensure that the governance is moderate and there is respect for the rights that the world has been talking about.
That if one country that was proved right in all this scenario, it's Pakistan. Since decades and even in this conflict since months, our advice, I wish if the world would have paid heed to our advice. Things would have been totally different in Afghanistan. I can tell you that in 2 to 3 meetings with President Ashraf Ghani, Prime Minister, even before the elections, Prime Minister advised him, forget about elections, try to have an inclusive government in Afghanistan. Unfortunately, Mr. Ghani was in some kind of euphoria. He never listened to us. Had he listened to us, things would have been different today. So today we have, being all of you are here, being a very distinguished guests of Pakistan and obviously very distinguished journalists in your own ranks. We will take you to the program is that we will take you to the Torkham, where you can see the border area, you can see the arrangements that we have made. Also, Pakistan is hosting about 3.5 million refugees for years and years now. And the conflict in Afghanistan actually scares us for many reasons, and one major reason is that we don't want more people from Afghanistan to get into Pakistan. We're already hosting 3.5 million people. Our economy is not that strong where we can host so many other hundreds and thousands or more people here. So there are so many reasons for us to seek stability in Afghanistan, and this is certainly one of the major reasons for us that we want to do all we can for a stable government in Afghanistan. And we believe that stable government in Afghanistan means inclusive government in Afghanistan. This was our advice to the previous government. This is our advice to the present government, and we believe that kind of the complexity of the situation in Afghanistan and ethnic complexity that Afghanistan has in its character, there is no other way but to have an inclusive government. So we will try all we can. In Pakistan has paid a heavy price of this conflict in the past. We want the world to listen to us. We want world to analyze the situation dispassionately. We don't want to get into that who was wrong and who was right. in the past. We want everyone to take responsibility of the situation, and this issue cannot be taken casually. This issue needs a very serious approach of world leaders for the resolution. Otherwise, a human catastrophe is just on the cards. As we have seen what happened in Kabul, there's a vacuum there. If this vacuum continues, instability is bound to take over all other events. So the story of Afghanistan has a very, I would say, a painful past. We want a better ending, and for that we believe that Pakistan has played a very responsible role in the past. We are even now trying to bring the situation in control, and with this briefing today we will actually it will be just an introduction to what we are doing now and what we intend to do. And also we want you to play a role where you can tell the world the real story of Afghanistan and this region. This is a human catastrophe. It's a story of a pain, and I would say we all need to work together on that. Thank you very much.
I'm going to give you a very analytical presentation. That's been most of my life, because it's sometimes I